My name is Rebecca Moore, and if you had asked me a few years ago whether my life could still surprise me, I would have laughed and shaken my head. By the time I turned 58, I believe my story had already been written. I had lived the chapters of love, motherhood, and loss. My husband, Michael, had passed away 8 years earlier, leaving a silence in my life that no book, no gardening, no cup of tea could quite fill. My two children had their own families now, busy, distant lives filled with responsibilities. They called me on weekends, sometimes invited me for the holidays, but I was always aware that I was on the edges of their circles, not at the center anymore. I didn't blame them. That was life. Children grow, parents age, and roles shift. But the truth was, evenings in my quiet Oregon home stretched long, the ticking clock reminding me of a solitude I hadn't chosen, but had accepted. I had convinced myself that I was too old for change, too old for reinvention, too old for excitement. It was a lie I repeated daily, until the spring I met Daniel Carter. It happened in the most ordinary of places, a flyer at the community center bulletin board. Beginner's painting workshop, it read, with bright splashes of watercolor decorating the edges. I don't know what made me pause. Perhaps it was the colors, perhaps the thought of simply being around people again. I had never painted in my life, but something inside whispered, why not? The first evening of the class, I almost turned back. The studio was filled with people much younger than me. College students, young mothers, men with sleeves rolled up like they had just left work. I felt out of place immediately. And then Daniel walked in. He was in his early 40s, with messy brown hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. His jeans were stained with paint, his shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and his voice carried an energy that seemed to brighten the room. He greeted everyone like old friends. When his eyes met mine, something in his expression softened. "Welcome," he said warmly, as though he had been waiting for me specifically. "I'm glad you're here." I sat at the back, determined to be invisible, but Daniel had a way of making everyone feel seen. He moved around the room, encouraging, joking, teaching, not in the rigid way of a school instructor, but in the free-spirited way of someone who loved what they did and wanted everyone else to love it too. When he came to my table, I admitted nervously, I don't think I belong here. I've never painted before. Honestly, I'm too old to start something like this. Daniel tilted his head, studying me not with judgment but curiosity. Then he smiled. "Rebecca, you're not too old. You're layered. And layered stories make the best paintings." His words sank deep. Layered. Not too old. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe there was more to me than the quiet routines I'd settled into. The first few classes, I was hesitant. My hands trembled holding the brush, my strokes were shaky, and the colors on my canvas looked muddled. But Daniel never made me feel like I failed. Instead, he leaned closer, pointing to the canvas. "You see this," he'd say. "This isn't a mistake. It's texture. It's depth. It's part of the story." Slowly, I began to loosen up. My canvases grew bolder. Reds and golds crept into the blues and grays I had clung to. One evening, when I dared to paint something abstract and wild, Daniel grinned. "There you are," he said softly. "That's you." I didn't understand fully what he meant, but I felt it. Something inside me was stirring awake. Outside of class, Daniel and I began to talk more. Sometimes after everyone left, he'd linger with me, washing brushes and chatting. He told me about his travels, how he'd painted murals in Mexico, sketched streets in Paris, and camped under stars in Arizona deserts. His life seemed like the opposite of mine, colorful, unplanned, adventurous. And yet, he listened to me with the kind of attention that made me feel like my quiet years mattered too. One rainy evening, as he walked me to my car, I confessed, "You make it sound so easy, living freely, chasing new things. But for me, it feels like that part of life is over." Daniel looked at me, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes steady. "Rebecca, the story isn't over until you stop turning the pages. You think you're too old for change? No, you've just lived through more chapters. That means you have more to paint, not less." That night, I sat in my car long after he left. His words echoed in my chest. I had spent so long believing my best days were behind me. What if he was right? What if there were still chapters left to write? The weeks turned into months, and with each brushstroke, I felt myself changing. I laughed more in class, even cracked a joke once, surprising myself. I joined a hiking trip Daniel organized for the group, a simple trail near the Columbia River Gorge. I hadn't hiked in years, and halfway through, my legs ached, but Daniel walked beside me, telling stories that made the climb feel lighter. At the top, overlooking the vast green valley, I felt something I hadn't in years, alive. It wasn't about romance, not yet, maybe not ever. It was about rediscovering a piece of myself I thought was gone. One evening, after finishing a painting that surprised me with its brightness, I whispered to him, I thought my story was over. Daniel smiled gently, almost as if he had been waiting for me to say it. Rebecca, sometimes the best chapters are the ones we never saw coming. In that moment, I knew. He hadn't just taught me how to paint. He had taught me how to live again, how to embrace possibility, how to welcome laughter, how to see myself not as someone fading, but as someone still unfolding. I still live alone in my Oregon home. My children still call on weekends. My life is not suddenly glamorous or without sorrow. But now, when I wake in the morning, I feel a spark of curiosity. What will I paint today? Where might I go? Who might I meet? Because life, I've learned, doesn't end when the world tells you you're past your prime. It ends only when you stop believing in beginnings. And I am not done beginning.